as I shared earlier, she and I went to language school together a couple of years ago in Karuizawa, Nagano-ken, Japan. And so Roberta and Alan Oda is going to, they're going to be kind of teaching this one today. And so if you would just welcome Roberta and thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon. I'm partly jet lagged, so I don't know what planet I'm on. Welcome to this place. This is wonderful to hear all these ministries are happening. For the past 13 months of my life, I've been involved in Crash Japan. I've been a volunteer placement officer. Met Alan a number of times because he's really recruited a lot of people to come over. I do have a PowerPoint that, is it going to work? Okay. This, Jonathan Wilson graciously gave me his PowerPoint, but a lot of people are wondering what's happening next. And the disaster relief in Tohoku, that's not stopped. It's just taking different forms as staffing goes down, as funding goes down. So basically we're at the phase of moving to recovery. It's like I get the imaginary clicker here. And the example, this is a very Japanese example. You have this huge ship that's a kilometer inland, and what do you do? What do you do with a big ship? We plant flowers around it. So, but things are not back to normal, and even though the big relief is over, and they pretty much know how many people will never be found, it's not normal. Normal is a word that they don't really know there. Next slide. So what's next? And keep going. Okay, this is the vision. Well, okay, that's the vision statement of Crash, and this is really key right now as the transition's going on. We serve local churches by mobilizing Christian volunteers to bring help and hope into people affected by disaster. Now, Crash is not new. Crash was around before the March 11th disaster. So Crash is now continuing with this vision. This is a vision they've had for 8 years. But as Crash downsizes, we're trying to empower the local ministries that are in the area. Next one. I don't know if you said it. Okay, so this is the numbers that someone was asking me earlier about mobilized volunteers previous to the disaster relief in Tohoku. So this is the history of Crash. So it's quite interesting, trying to get the Christian churches involved in volunteerism, in serving other people. So go to the next one. Okay, so this is 3 key points that I've really seen in action over the past year. Mobilize volunteers, encourage sustainable partnerships, and raised awareness and funds. All those things are still the current key values of Crash. And those just kicked into high gear with the Tohoku disaster, which was unprecedented on anybody's imagination. Please go to the next one. Okay, so this is the ongoing part that we're in now. Now, the ongoing recovery support, Operation Safe, the second one, will be quite key because we're dealing with trauma relief for children. Because 6 months after the Tohoku tsunami, it was really becoming very clear that the children needed a lot of help, so they have trauma relief. And now they've spent a lot of time preparing for the next big disaster in Japan. Because if you listen to news from Japan, they're talking about the other earthquake possibilities and the other tsunami possibilities in Japan. So what has happened is this whole procedure of Tohoku has served to increase an awareness in the Christian community of how to be ready for the next disaster, to serve in that way. Okay, go on. Yeah, those are our wonderful tools. This is the next big earthquake. They're predicting that if it happened in the Nankai Trough, it would be bigger than the Tohoku disaster. And the population and the numbers of deaths would be huge. So this was an education for me to realize that even though we think of Tohoku as something unimaginable, this is what they're looking at for a possible future disaster. Some people say within 5 years, within 10 years. So this has really brought an awareness to many people in Japan, Christian and non-Christian, of being ready for the next big disaster. Go on to the next one. And this is the list of countries that are, how did you say it, that have had a lot of disasters. Now, if you look at the list, in large part, those are third world countries as far as disaster exposure. But Japan, at number 5, is a first world country that is number 5 in disaster exposure. So we have the resources to take care of disaster in Japan in a lot of ways compared to these other countries. Next one, yeah. Black screen. Okay. That's it? Okay. That's what happens when you borrow someone's PDF. But really in Japan, what's been encouraging is I have met a number of you that have been to Japan once or twice in the past year. And as I was telling a lot of people, the thing with the people in the temporary housing, if they see overseas volunteers from more than once, they realize that they have not been forgotten. And it's not really a big issue of whether or not you speak Japanese, but if you do, it's a little bit of a plus. But the Ministry of Presence, and that was a big thing that came out when we prepared a training video for our overseas teams. The overall theme that we didn't realize was coming out as we made this training video is the Ministry of Presence to the Japanese people, to the people in the relief agencies, the temporary housing. Now, I have a number of ministry contacts in Tohoku because people have been asking what's going to happen from here on out. And many ministries are continuing to work there. Crash, in large part, is handing off ministries to local agencies. And I'd like Alan to tell you about when he's worked both with a crash base and with a partner ministry. And so he has seen both sides of it, and he's brought 2 different kinds of teams, so if you can share a little bit of that.
Didn't know I was going to be speaking today, but I'm glad to be of service for the work of Crash. Can I give you some background as to how I got involved? Just take a moment. When I got the text alert on I don't have a smartphone, I have a dumb phone because my wife doesn't trust me with a smartphone. I got the text alert that said a massive earthquake had hit Japan. So I immediately went online to NHK, the Japanese, I guess, it's the public broadcast, it's sort of like their CNN. And I watched the tsunami come in and it didn't destroy it, it annihilated the land, the lands that, I mean, you saw this perfect farmland that you knew was going to be obliterated. You saw these buildings that were covered, buildings that were many stories high, and you knew this was not going to be good. That was just obvious. And so there was a group, including GEMS, our church conference. We had other churches that were involved, and we came together and we talked about what could we do to help with the relief effort in Japan. And to make the long story short, I got asked to go to Japan and help visit, work with Crash. And I'll be the first to admit to you that when I was asked to go, and even when I'm on the airplane, I was mad at God, a little mad at God. I know what the scripture says, we will have earthquakes, that we will have floods, we'll have disasters. But I felt like I got punched in the stomach as I watched that tsunami come in and destroy just anything in front of it. So, as I was thinking about it, because usually when I go to Japan, it's to see family or to do something fun, so there was very little joy that I anticipated this trip. So as I am on the flight, and my partner Tommy Joe has wisely fallen asleep, because I was talking to him the whole time. I was praying that, Lord, you're going to have to show me a new definition of joy. So we get to the headquarters of Crash, then immediately we jump into a van. We think we drove about 1,200 miles in 5 days. So we saw the 5 bases, was 4 of the 5 bases that Crash had. And one of the places we went to is a place in Iwaki. And the pastor, I think is it Mori Sensei or Sato Sensei? I can't remember. Mori Sensei. Went to Mori Sensei's church, and he had chosen to stay in that area, even though many people had evacuated. He was outside of the danger zone from the radiation of the nuclear plant, but he had chosen to stay to minister to the people there. And he shared with us his work, and he said that when God's people come together, there is joy when they're doing His purpose. Okay, sometimes God has to be really obvious for me before I understand something, so there was part of my answer. And then between the relief work, we did get a chance to do some building cleanup, doing meals, so on and so forth. The rest of my time was spent in the headquarters. And I saw people from around the world. I saw seniors working next to high school students. I saw people from different denominations. Denominations that, since I work in college, you know about how some churches don't get along. I know that's hard to believe. Sometimes churches don't always get along with each other. But they were working side by side. And I saw what Sato Sensei was talking about. And I went to Japan, and I think this had to come from God because I felt like I got the answer in Japanese. Given my Japanese, I know that it had to be from God because my Japanese is not that good. But I went to Japan, asking the question, Kami-sama doshite? God, why? And I realized while I was in Japan, the real question you should have asked is, Kami-sama doshimashou? God, what next? And so that's why I've been doing the work, have the privilege of doing the work with Crash. So I've been in touch with Pastor Jonathan and with Roberta and the other folks there. So this past year, we put together a team from my church and our sister church, and we went with a partner ministry for the Mahalika Mission Center over in Daito, which is over near Ichinoseki, a little about maybe half an hour inland from the coastline. And in this particular area, most of the people there are senior citizens because the children leave for the city. So a lot of them have fallen through the cracks of the relief effort. What few of the young men are there, or actually middle-aged men now, let's just say getting married was not very easy to do. So they are now married to Filipino nationals who came to Japan to get married. Well, I think you can understand, especially because the Japanese men don't speak English and their wives do not speak Japanese. They're kind of falling between the cracks too in terms of the relief work that's available. So this pastor, who heads the Mahalika Mission Center, he's actually Japanese national, but he did his seminary in the Philippines, so that's why he has his heart for that population. He set up this mission center. He's converting an old elementary school to work with the seniors, to work with Filipino women, in general to serve the community, because he sees that these people need to be reached for Jesus too. And the one thing I can tell you about Tohoku that's very interesting, that Tohoku is not like the rest of Japan. The story has that Buddhist priests, Shinto priests, get very frustrated because that area is not really, they're not traditional. They don't necessarily buy into the traditional church. And they have noticed that who's been the only presence there regularly? It's been the church. And you've heard this several times that you'll go to one of these cassettes at the temporary housing, and you get this kind of friendly greeting of, oh, you again? But it's very friendly because they're very surprised and blessed that someone would keep coming back to visit and serve. So this is where Crash is right now. And of course the question has been, and I've heard this from many people, it says, so is Crash closing down? No, Crash is not closing down. It was established before the Tohoku earthquake. It continues to be a resource for the churches, so they will mobilize and serve throughout the world. But obviously after March 11, 2011, they were called on to serve their own, their own country. But now one of the reasons why they're shifting and quote-unquote downsizing the program is because, number one, the whole idea was to hand these things off to the church to begin with, because they're the permanent presence in the area. That's number one. Number two, After disaster, let's face it, support does begin to decrease. So the decision was made that if we're going to gather money, we're going to send it directly to places that need the help. So that's really the reason why things are changing with Crash. That said, they're continuing to collect funds that will be distributed to the areas of need. I think they're continuing to coordinate volunteers. Like I said, we were sent to the partner ministry. So, for example, my team, other than myself, no one went to the Crash headquarters. But they went directly. They served. They did a great job, and that's where I'm right now. So I hand it back to Roberta, and she'll give some more details and make corrections on anything that I said. Thanks.
Actually, Alan is so tied into the crash office that he knows it just as well as I do. Well, lately, we've been trying to give information to people to realize Crash is not closing down, Crash is not going to evaporate, because Crash has been around for 8 years and will continue to be around. A large part of what has been happening in recent months with passing things over to local ministries is also chaplaincy training. Japanese pastors are being trained as disaster relief chaplains. This is a brand new thing. The Salvation Army has a very good disaster chaplaincy program, and they have got it in Japanese now, and they are training regular pastors, regular believers, how to be disaster chaplaincy relief workers. And that's pretty key, because this is not something that the average Japanese person knows how to do, because usually they just pass everything off to the pastor. Another important thing is we're preparing for the next disaster, because Crash was able to get started very quickly in March because they had a history of doing some previous smaller disasters. But if the next disaster is as large as they're predicting it, there needs to be a whole infrastructure ready to put right into place as far as receiving volunteers, sending people out, getting people mobilized. And we, as Crash, we were looked to by a lot of agencies as the go-to group when the disaster happened, which was really quite impressive, because I had heard about Crash because I've known Pastor Wilson for quite a while, but now they're realizing that they're seeing areas in which they were really unprepared for March 11th, but they're also seeing how strong the response of the Japanese church has been to send people into the disaster area. We have a couple of Singaporean churches that have sent 7 teams a year. The Holiness denomination has sent 2 to 3 teams a month. And so there are people, including the Japan Evangelical Association, that are invested in continuing to be the body of Christ to the people in Tohoku. Tohoku is one of the more unchurched areas. Fukushima, a lot of people have been staying away from Fukushima, so parts of Fukushima have really fallen through the cracks as far as relief work. Mahalika in Ichinoseki, which he was talking about, is another place. It'd be wonderful to say that in this huge area that the disaster and the relief work has been quite consistent, but there are a lot of spots where people just haven't gotten the things that they need. And even last fall, we would go to some of the temporary housing, and we would ask the people, well, what do you need? And they'd say, well, I don't have a kerosene stove yet, I don't have blankets yet. And so we would just carefully note everything down, and as soon as we got more supplies from wherever they came from, we would bring those supplies. So there's still a lot of finding out what the needs are. And you have a large population of elderly people that are being told by the government, well, in 2 years, you can go back to your property and rebuild. Well, 77-year-old grandpa's saying, in 2 years, I'll be 79, my kids live in Tokyo, why would I want to rebuild in 2 years? So there's a lot of uncertainty. Pastor Sato's church, which was a church very close to the nuclear power plant, they've had to abandon their old building. Of course, they don't get to abandon the mortgage, I'm sure, but they have just recently moved back into the prefecture, because I said, we are Fukushima First Bible Baptist Church, so we need to move back. And the miracle story with Pastor Sato's situation is he went up and talked to non-Christian realtors, and he said, I need a apartments for my people, because they were living in a Bible camp in West Tokyo. I need apartments for my people. I need land to build elderly housing. I need land to build a church. And he said to the non-Christian realtor, I need at least 30 apartments. And the realtor was like, there's just no way you're going to get 30 apartments. And he came back from that trip, and the fax machine was just spitting out all these pages. That day, the realtor got 30 apartments. The non-Christian realtor had never seen anything like this ever happen. And, Pastor Sato was able to say, well, our people prayed. Our people prayed to God that would happen. So he's now back up there. I don't know when they start rebuilding the church, or building the church, but it's been a really difficult time for that church because, they've had baptisms and funerals and just a large group, 60 people or so to keep together for a year. And it was quite stressful, but the Lord has really blessed them. They're able to go back there, but I don't know exactly where they are. Another exciting thing is we do have a lot of paper to hand you. This is showing what the next phase is going to be like, because it's talking about what's happening with the long-term vision of Crash. And the long-term vision, even though our staff is downsizing, I've been downsized, I'm now officially a volunteer, not an employee anymore, but the long-term vision of Crash has remained unchanged. But partnering with those local ministries. On our website now, if you go to volunteer opportunities from October 1st, you may be channeled directly to an area ministry. Now, some of these ministries we're still determining who they take as far as Japanese speakers, English speakers, but we're giving you direct contact, and you're able to choose where you want to go. And so I've got a list of that as well. And Jonathan has really written very clearly what the next phase is, because we have 5 bases with Crash, and we did have 5 bases. Tono base is the furthest north base. That is now the Iwate Ministry Initiative under my mission team, and it's becoming, it's a combined relief work with church planting emphasis, and that the people that were in charge of Tono base have taken that over as a ministry initiative, and they have 2 Japanese staff and their daughter who need to raise support to be there. But it's really great because these missionaries have been in Nagoya area for years and years and years, and God just gave them passion for Tohoku. This is true in many mission agencies. Many missionaries and many Japanese nationals have moved up to Tohoku at great sacrifice. Then there's the Ichinoseki base, which is now going to be passed off to the 311 network, which is part of the DOME, the Japan, in English it's Japan Alliance Mission. It's Nihon Dome Christo Kyodan. That they are taking that over. They are retaining 1 Crash staff person, and Bert and Kat, which Honda Sensei was speaking about earlier, are part of that as team and GEMS, kind of a hybrid type of missionary. So they are up there. Sendai base is still Sendai base, but it's largely going to be operated by Seaside Chapel. Seaside Chapel was obliterated in the tsunami, but they were able to rent a cafe in Sendai City to continue their work. And so Seaside Chapel will be taking that over, but there still will be quite a large connection with Crash for a while. Now, we used to have 2 other bases in Hitachi and Nasu. The Nasu base has become the Koriyama office, and they're working with a lot of partnerships with local churches, and they're not really receiving as many volunteers, but they're finding different opportunities. And the Hitachi base became the Iwaki office, and because one thing that became very clear in the leadership of Crash is that we didn't want to abandon Fukushima Prefecture, because it's a very large prefecture, and the area that is the nuclear disaster is actually quite small. And so the Fukushima people were just feeling very And then people ask about Samaritan's Purse, because we've also, our Sendai base has worked very closely with Samaritan's Purse, as our Ichinoseki base has also worked very closely with them. Samaritan's Purse stopped receiving volunteers from the end of August. And then from August to the end of the year, they're hoping to finish up what they've started. And part of one thing that is a future project for them that might not happen right away is they have promised to build a church for Seaside Chapel. Because Seaside Chapel just has that little cafe. And so they have made a promise to them that they would rebuild a building for them once they find land. There's still a lot of exciting things happening in Tohoku. And amazingly, out of a very difficult situation, there is a great deal of hope. And there is still a lot of sadness, but there is a great deal of hope. And it's still in need of a lot of our prayers. Now, I'm going to take questions in a little bit, but another project that we just started, this was done by our PR department, it's headed by a teen missionary, Million Cranes for Japan. Now, if you look on the internet, you'll see various Million Cranes projects, but this is to get people all around the world to make origami cranes and sell them to their friends for $1 and collect the money and send it to Crash. And right now we have some kids in Germany that are making 300 to 500 cranes, right, even as we speak, to collect the money for the tsunami relief agents, so tsunami relief. So it's exciting. There's a lot of ideas, and connecting with the RJC theme at the Crash office, about half of the staff at the Crash office are returnees. So it's been a very exciting time to watch Japanese young people be thrust into leadership roles, and especially for the young girls, they're given a lot of responsibility and a lot of trust, which maybe they don't get that opportunity in their church, but it's been a real productive thing for growing the young leaders to see how they can use their Christian gifts in all areas of life. So that's been really exciting. So I encourage you to get any of the pamphlets from me. Do you have anything to chime in? So if you have any questions, I'm not an expert on Crash or Japan, but I've lived it quite full time for the past 13 months. So if you have any questions, I'd be willing to answer them for you. And yes?
You mentioned how you were called upon at the very beginning of the disasters to try to, that you were recognized as a go-to group. How did that come about?
Do you know how that came about? How Crash got to be recognized?
Roberta?
How Crash was recognized early on as a go-to group. I think just because we kept a web presence and a Facebook presence, and Jonathan title, and we laugh about it all the time. Christian Relief, Assistance, Support, and Hope. And, you know, people make jokes, but people do not forget the name of Crash Japan. It's very memorable, but Christian Relief, Assistance, I got that wrong. Assistance, support, and hope. And the hope is the big part. I think the name is very memorable, but the hope, Christian and the hope at the end of it, because we're bringing the hope that we have in Christ to people that don't have hope. And so, and we're doing it in the name of Christ. And as far as Ichinoseki goes, we've heard a lot of stories from the staff that people from the local area have asked for Bibles. One by one. It's not huge movements of people, but one by one as they interact with the base staff, as they see them there over time. And these are young men who have become Christians. And that's usually the hardest group to reach in Japan. And so it's been amazing. It's not anything that anybody's going to write huge newsletters about anytime soon, but one by one, people are coming to faith in Christ. I think the Kesanuma Church, which is down the hill from Ichinoseki, had a baptism a few months ago, and they had 4 people baptized. Now, if you know anything about numbers in Japan, that is rather significant. And most of them were men. So the Lord is working there. It's quiet. People don't, broadcast it much. People are seeing Christ the life of Christ lived out through the volunteers, and they want to read the Bible, and they want to know Jesus. And it's just an amazing thing.
I'm wondering, about Crash's relationship with the Christian organization's relationship with the local government and the federal government. How that works with their.
Well, the reason my mission is connected in a lot of ways with Crash is because when the disaster happened, Crash had existed for a number of years, but it had not become an NGO or an NPO yet. And so they used a lot of the skills of our team office with the Evangelical Alliance mission in Japan to get cars, phones, and various things. But since September of last year, they got incorporated, and now they are legal. What's the English word? I can remember it in Japanese. But they are recognized now by the government, and so they have to really dot their I's and cross their T's now, because they have to be very accountable. And we had our first audit in February, passed with sailing colors. So we are an official nonprofit organization now in Crash. So that's just in September. And but when we started after the Tohoku disaster, we worked very closely with the Japan Evangelical Association, which is a Japanese denomination, and many of the pastors are on our board, and with the Japan Evangelical Missionary Association, which is a grouping of the missionaries in Japan, and a number of other agencies that are also listed on the brochure. And so we, from the very beginning, it was a very cooperative relationship. There were connections, so Crash was never operating as a lone ranger. Very high accountability with the board, and so Jonathan is very visionary, so he had a lot of accountability from day one, which was really good, and a lot of planning. Like right now, they have steering committees and chiefs meetings just to chart the course of how to do the next step well, because we're in phase 4 at Crash. So yeah, we do have legal recognition now.
I wasn't interested in so much in the legal stuff, but the relationship with the local governments, their efforts to, or even the federal government, and their efforts to. It's very going on.
Okay. Oh, hello. It's very good. And again, what Roberta pointed out, and again, the thing about Crash being recognized by the government as an NGO, I mean, it's their relationship has been very good because they're just glad that somebody's there to help. So there has been some very good conversations with the different cities and the churches about being able to provide relief because, again, especially in some of these smaller areas, the Tohoku area, who are they going to turn to? There wasn't a heck of a lot of resources they had. They weren't prepared for a disaster of this magnitude. So it has worked rather well. And I just want to mention one other thing, just from my experience. I have heard the comment made that, well, the reason why God had this earthquake happen was this is given our chance to open up Japan to the gospel. Okay? I will physically hurt somebody, even at 5'4", I will physically hurt somebody who will give me that kind of nonsense. But I do believe in a God that will redeem any situation, and that's what I believe is happening. And I really believe that the work of God's people has made a difference, and I see there's just incredible seeds being planted throughout Japan, especially the Tohoku area, for the harvest.
And there has been a great shift in the mindset for people, because usually volunteerism is not something that Japanese people are really into. And so it's been a great shift in people's thinking to volunteer, Japanese nationals to volunteer, because usually you just, well, somebody will do it, you don't worry about it, it's somebody else's problem. But it's been really good, even in the Japanese Christian church, for the Japanese Christians to take responsibility to care for the people of Tohoku. That's been a huge shift in the mindset, and to not just tuck into think business as usual and just ignore it. So that's been a change, because volunteerism is now not a scary thing to most Japanese. After they've been once, most people want to go again. So it's been quite a change. And now, somebody asked me earlier about, well, how as a Christian group, what kind of freedom or limitations do you have in the temporary housing as far as preaching the gospel? Because we have had some American volunteers say, well, why aren't you just preaching straight out? Well, the temporary housing are public facilities, and we have to be very careful to follow the instructions of the base leadership or the whatever group we're working with, because in some areas, if we were to be very bold about preaching, we would lose that open door of opportunity. So it's hard for a lot of people because they really want to preach more directly, but we've won favor with the leaders of the temporary housing, and so we have to build that relationship. And of course in Japan, relationship is very key, and so some American volunteers have struggled with that because they say, well, why aren't you doing more? And they don't realize how huge of a thing it is for a Christian relief agency to have such an open door and such favor in the local areas. And that's really a blessing, and we don't want to lose opportunities for the future, because as we've seen in Ichinoseki, as we've been over there over time, when the questions come from the survivors, we are free to answer the questions. Even though we're not preaching all the time directly, those questions will come, and then we are free to answer those questions.
They want to know why we keep coming back.
Oh, they do.
I mean, that's the biggest question they have is, why do people keep coming back? You know, and I think that gives us that opportunity.
You mentioned that preparing the forecast is not so great, but there could be another disaster. To the extent that another seismic event probably the same. And is that from the words from the federal government, or just these people in this in general, this is going to happen?
Oh no, this is from the scientific viewpoint of how his question was about, I said about how there's predicted that there's going to be another major disaster on the future within 5 to 10 years of a bigger scale than the Tohoku disaster. I think they've realized what has happened is, I don't know all the science of earthquakes, but so much has shifted with what happened. Because I don't think there's been an earthquake like this for 1,000 years. I think they said it's like a Kyodai, I'm not Kyodai, a big, huge event. So that because of all that this is happening, and now they're reevaluating they're realizing that they, even with Japan as disaster prepared as it is, they're realizing after what happened in Tohoku that they were nowhere near thinking of what would happen if this happened in other areas. Because they found a fault line at the base of Mount Fuji. You know, if that happens, Mount Fuji is a sleeping volcano that will wake up. And so there's a lot of concerns.
But my focus of my question really
Yes.
is how, since that is on the horizon, what most do you think, based on what we've learned in the last disaster, what's the most hierarchical thing that needs to happen from a standpoint from preparing there as well as preparing here? Because if something happens in Los Angeles, we have an earthquake in a situation. How are we prepared, or how we were prepared to help them, or even how are we supposed to prepare ourselves? Is there such a thing that can be a hierarchical thing that could?
Are you talking about here in LA, or are you talking about?
I'm trying to have both, but I mean, I guess it should be there.
Okay, I think, let me even back up a little bit. From a seismic perspective, the Tohoku area did very well with an earthquake of that magnitude. It was a tsunami that really was not predicted. And I just came back from there in August, and they showed me some areas where the tsunami, because of, let's say if you had some of these areas with mountains, because the, you know how you take a water to a garden hose, and when it gets funneled, the power gets even stronger. And so the tsunami would come between these two sides of the canyon, and so it accelerates. We're talking about waves that are the equivalent of maybe 100 feet high or something such as that, coming in maybe 6 kilometers. It's 6 kilometers is what, about 3 or 4 miles in. The ship that you saw in the pictures, I have a picture of myself taking it. The ship came in about a mile in, and there is no machinery that can move that ship. It has to be taken piece by piece because there's no way you could move that ship. So to sort of answer your question sort of in a sort of a roundabout way, the thing that they're learning from the Tohoku disaster is that preparing for the seismic thing is one thing. They have extremely strong building standards there. But you can't really prepare for tsunami that is anywhere from 20 feet to 100 feet high. So what do you do then in terms of trying to at least be better in terms of preparing people for evacuation, number one, and then number two, are there things that can be done to at least minimize some of the losses that are going to take place? Once unfortunate story that we heard in, I think it was Kesenuma, that the city hall is 5 stories high, and they were told that if you're on the second or third floor and above, you'd be okay. And so the mayor was at the command post on the 5th floor. His wife was on the 2nd floor, third floor, whatever the safety floor was, and the tsunami came in and washed out everything on the 3rd floor on down, so his wife was killed. And no one anticipated that. So there were a lot of things they learned in Tohoku that they, again, this is the kind of disaster that no one anticipated. So I guess the way to answer your question sort of indirectly is that they've learned a lot, but at the same time, what to do is still something that you're trying to figure out. There's a lot of questions that are still not quite, that they're still processing now, and that's what they're working on.
And how to prepare without living, for the non-Christian and the Christian, how to prepare without living in the spirit of fear.
Right.
And that's the challenge, especially for the non-believers, because they don't know what their traditional faith has no answer for them in that. And so it's quite a struggle for the Japanese people to realize this has happened, but the government keeps talking about more that could happen. And so they have looked at a lot of towns that might be rebuilt in Tohoku. Some may never be rebuilt because they had predicted maps of where tsunami would go. But some of the tsunamis went more than a kilometer further than those maps. And so people thought that they were in the safe zone, and they were not. And I used to live near the ocean, and there was a tsunami warning when I lived near the ocean. And I didn't move from my 2nd floor apartment or go anywhere. Now that I know what I know from March, I would move quite quickly. And hopefully people won't forget that. You know, as time goes on and the next chaplaincy training and the preparation that Crash is doing to have things ready for the next disaster. I hope we answered your question.
And that's where the hope part of Crash comes in, because for a lot of, and it's not just Japanese around the world, our value is in our possessions. Well, obviously the possessions aren't going to do you any good when you have a 10-foot tidal wave coming towards you. So our hope needs to be in God. And I think that's the message that the church can offer as Japan and anywhere prepares for the next disaster. Where is our true hope in? It's not going to be in our possessions. My wife kids me because we have a TV set that's 13 years old, and I'd like to get one of them fancy flat screen TVs. And then I saw in one of the places there was a flat screen TV among the debris that was being thrown out. So that sure resets some of the things that you think are important. And that's why I think we, with the gospel, those of us who are blessed to know the gospel, that's the hope that we can bring for people to know that that is what's important, not the material possessions that could be still used in some way.
Now, among the returnees, I work with returnees in Kanagawa and returnees in Tokyo, and what I've heard is at least 3 young ladies who have become Christians since the disaster, because what the disaster did, it made them think seriously about life. And they had been overseas, they had had a lot of Christian contact, but it wasn't until the disaster happened, which was very geographically removed from them, they were in Tokyo area, when they seriously thought about the Bible, and the girls got to read the Bible and just actively sought the Lord. And if this disaster hadn't happened, they might not have been stirred to be more serious in their thinking. And so these girls are actually very thankful to the Lord that this happened at this time, because they said they would have continued on their selfish ways, but now they know the Lord and they have peace and they have hope because they stopped to think long enough to realize that they needed Jesus. And so I know 3 returnees that know the Lord because they just were taken. I mean, it was a shock to many of the girls, these particular girls that I talked to. It was a shock to their system. It was like their world as they had known it. Even though they knew no one in Tohoku, they lived in Tokyo, they had a good job, it just changed their whole worldview. And they just realized that they needed Jesus. And so I'm just excited for these girls because they're very sharp, they're very on fire for the Lord, and they're growing. So it's just interesting to see in the returnees' heart just how involved they've been, because they've had the overseas experience and because they love the Lord, how they've been able to use both of that to serve others. And so I've seen a lot of returnees just learn more about serving people outside of the church and becoming a more active witness. That's kind of connected, but kind of different. So I have many flyers, many papers. I have bracelets if you want them, because this is one of the few things I've found that says pray for Japan rather than hope for Japan. So any other questions?
Before we run out of time, though, I do want to say this. Roberta was part of the paid staff at Crash, but believe me, nobody gets rich working for Crash. And she worked extremely hard to coordinate the volunteer teams and to just be part of, I think, an incredible effort in Japan. I don't think anyone's had a chance to thank her for it, so I would like to say thank you and recognize the great work that you did for Crash. And I would like to
Yeah, it's kind of something that I never expected to do, because I went to Indonesia in 2005, and the Lord used that experience in my life because I was the healthiest I had ever been, and then came back and had some health problems after that, that if the health problems had happened in Indonesia, I would be dead. So, the Lord put that in my life, and I was in America when the tsunami happened, and my dear mother, she earns her sainthood badge because she's standing next to me in the grocery store. People come up to me and say, "We're so glad you weren't in Japan." And mother's like, down road, because I I've lived in Japan 21 years, and it's a miracle that I'm there because it's not an easy place to be, but it's all God. You know, I'm just kind of there, and I'm just cheering all the, especially in the returning work, I'm cheering all the young leaders on to just say, serve the Lord, be shining witnesses for the Lord. Because I'm just in the background. I'm what they call a flower on the wall or something. So, but any questions? Because I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces from EC and DJ's pastor and Burton and Kat's pastor. And so I have so many hats, I have to keep my crash hat on. Crash is just in Japan, and it's Japan-based. Japan started. So, yeah, he's asking if Crash is just in Japan, but if you glanced at the PowerPoint, in the early days, Jonathan and his wife did go to China and other areas outside of Japan where there were disasters. I think most of the effort has been kind of overwhelmed by Tohoku at present because hopefully as things restructure and that the Crash will be able to help in some of the smaller disasters because we have big landslides and flooding in Wakayama, and we were able to partner with a minister down there to help them out too. So it's just been, Tohoku's been incredibly overwhelming.
There's a tornado in Tsukuba a couple months ago,
Oh, yeah.
which doesn't happen in Japan, and it was amazing that Crash was able to come in
And they've also done the Operation Safe program in Tsukuba. The pastors at a church in Tsukuba invited Jonathan's wife to come down and do the Operation Safe program for the children, which is, you know, the trauma relief program. Yeah, the VA probably knows about that. And you know, that's a hard program to do because in Tohoku, the kids are holding on to a lot of fierce feelings. And I remember we did one Operation Safe. I say we in the generic sense, and the workers came back saying, yeah, we had to spend most of the week being beaten up because the little boys were quite rambunctious. But at the end, it had a very good result. So, because the little boys started inviting their other friends. But investing in the children and investing in the people is quite important. So, yes.
What do the people in Pepperoni help? Do they have a job or?
That depends on the area they're in. As far as people, she's asking if people in Tohoku have jobs. It depends on the area that they're in. I've only had like anecdotal stories, but I know that in the Fukushima area near the nuclear power plant, a lot of times the mom and the kids have gone and lived elsewhere, and dad's still as close in as he can to maintain the job. In the other northern areas where everything was washed out, that is a problem with the men in the temporary housing, is they lost their jobs. And as far as rebuilding, they're still getting delays from the government as far as when they can rebuild in the areas that were totally devastated. So it depends on where they are. There's some areas where men have been able to go and find other jobs, and there's other areas where there's just nothing. So I don't know which areas are better or stronger than the others, but that is a problem. That is quite a problem. And people still, apparently still have mortgages to pay for houses that were washed away. So
You mentioned about the children, so do they go back to school?
yeah, I think pretty early on, even in the evacuation centers, there was some structure for the children. Some schools have been relocated, and I think school went back to normal pretty quickly. I think it was like after September, did they go back into school?
They started the schools back as soon as they could. So
Yeah.
I would say as early as June, you started to see some of the May, June, you started to see some of the schools come back
And I think they
online.
did go through the summer too, because
But where the trauma came in was you would return back to your school and half your classmates aren't there. You don't know if they had been relocated elsewhere or they'd never come back.
and it find out which kids have died, which kids have been relocated. And it's been quite a stretch for some of the families to figure out, because it was a few months before they found some of the remains of people too. So yeah, so that's still up in the air. But they basically, school started back up in June in some areas, in very rough facilities, and then some schools have gone back to their original buildings, depending on how damaged they were. And you know, it's a challenge for the kids. It's not an easy situation.
I just want to follow up because I'm from Fukushima. And actually, the government is subsidizing those people who lost their jobs and who has been relocated. But the other side of the problem is that they just receive money. So most of them actually spend all day at the pachinko para. You know what the pachinko para is? In Japan, there's a lot of places that it's a kind of gambling place. And so when I went to Fukushima, I was in the inland of Fukushima. Most of the pachinko para was full during the weekdays.
Yeah,
And I
Chico
was really
again.
surprised that, and they said most of the people are relocated.
And drinking.
And also another problem about the children is many of the children from the area that school has been sort of like devastated. They were relocated to the other area, so they actually go attend the school of the other area. But they also face challenges because it's a little bit Tohoku area is sort of like if you go to like a Kanto area, people sort of like make fun of Tohoku people. It's like people have accent, and also people kind of make fun of like Inakamon. It's like country bumpkin.
Country bumpkin, yeah.
So it's like many children also face those challenges as well.
And if you say you're from Fukushima, people have an odd reaction to you. You know, even if you're not from the coast. Now, what town are you from?
I'm from Shirakawa.
How far inland is that?
It's like Fukushima divided into 3 areas.
Yeah.
I'm from the middle area.
Okay, so you were quite far from the nuclear power. Yeah. But still, the word Fukushima, I mean, I've had volunteers that I was going to send to southern Fukushima, far away from the nuclear power plant, but the minute they heard the word Fukushima, they wouldn't go.
That's actually creating the biggest problem is like Fukushima, entire Fukushima prefecture, anything made in Fukushima, nobody wants to buy it.
Yeah, the
Like
vegetables.
And the first country that banned import from Fukushima was the United States. And our village was the biggest exporter of plants, but they lost the majority of business. And that's actually becoming a big problem. And many people don't want to return to Fukushima. So
It's quite a challenge because Fukushima is so large that if you know the geography, it's a very small area that's actually considered at risk. But as a lot of people don't have jobs or dad's staying there to keep a job. A friend in Australia is ministering to a mom and 2 children in Australia, and dad's back in Fukushima working. So that's really hard on the families because dad's got to work a lot, and it's quite a challenge. You know, pray for Fukushima. That's why we have the Koriyama